Russia's war effort in Ukraine, which began over 2.5 years ago, has now entered a critical phase. On one side, the Russian war machine is running low on weapons and ammunition, and on the other side, it faces a severe shortage of workers back home. These dual crises are not just about the battlefield, they represent a deeper issue for Moscow's capacity to sustain its aggression in Ukraine. The question many are asking is, will Russia retreat? Let's start with the basics. Russia's ability to continue its military operations is becoming increasingly strained. On paper, Moscow still maintains a significant military presence with around 470,000 soldiers stationed on the front lines in Ukraine. But behind those numbers is a growing problem. Russia's stockpiles of weapons and ammunition, once considered vast and plentiful, are rapidly depleting. The longer the war drags on, the more obvious this reality becomes. The Russian military-industrial complex MIC, which has been central to Moscow's war efforts, is under immense pressure. For decades, the MIC has operated under a veil of secrecy. Even before Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, much of its production capacity, reserves, and output were kept confidential. But since 2014, the Kremlin has further tightened its grip on information, classifying data that was previously public. For example, by 2016, Russia stopped releasing financial data from key defense plants, and by 2023, over 22.6% of its federal budget was classified. Looking ahead to 2024, this share is expected to rise even further. This secrecy makes it difficult for outsiders to assess the exact state of Russia's military production capabilities, but what's clear is that the old Soviet-era supply chains have deteriorated. The factories that once churned out weapons on a massive scale are either mothballed or operating well below capacity. The situation is bleak. Before we dig deeper, don't forget to hit that like button if you're finding this analysis informative. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into global events like this one. Alright, let's keep going. While Moscow still has more artillery than Ukraine, these weapons are aging and their effectiveness is waning. With its supply chain disrupted, Russia can't easily replace what it uses up on the battlefield. Each day of fighting in Ukraine, each missile strike, tank engagement, or artillery barrage chips away at Russia's already dwindling resources. At this point, there's real concern that Moscow may need to shift from an offensive strategy to a more defensive posture. The Economist recently noted that Russian forces might be forced to adjust their posture to one that is much more defensive. This would be a stark change for a country that for decades prided itself on its military might. But without the resources to maintain its current pace, Moscow may have no choice. As weapons supplies dwindle, Russia is likely to dig in and focus on holding territory rather than pushing forward. But it's not just weapons that are in short supply. Russia is also facing a labor crisis. As more and more working-age men are conscripted into the military, the country's economy is being hollowed out from within. Defense contractors are particularly hard hit, struggling to find workers to keep up with the demand for new weapons and equipment. It's been reported that there are currently about 160,000 job vacancies in the Russian defense industry, and that number could grow. This labor shortage doesn't just affect the defense sector, it's affecting the entire Russian economy. The Bell, a Russian news outlet, noted that the country could face a shortfall of 2.4 million workers by the end of the decade if current trends continue. The Kremlin is facing a difficult dilemma: allow more migrants into the country to fill the gaps or continue funneling men to the front lines. Both options carry significant risks socially, economically, and politically. Now let's fast forward to August 2024. Just when it seemed that the war had settled into a grinding stalemate, Ukraine surprised everyone by launching an unexpected offensive into Russia's Kursk Oblast. The operation caught not only the Russian border forces off guard, but also many Western diplomats who were unprepared for such a bold move. Ukrainian forces managed to seize over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory and around 70 settlements in a matter of days. For Ukraine, this was a huge morale boost and a sign that Kyiv could still take the initiative in the war. But for Russia, it was a massive blow, not only militarily but symbolically as well. This was the first time since World War II that foreign forces had invaded Russian territory. The Ukrainian incursion exposed a significant weakness in Russia's military defenses. The border areas were poorly defended by conscripts who were neither well-trained nor well-equipped to deal with such an attack. In contrast, Ukraine sent some of its best-trained troops and Western-supplied equipment to execute a blitzkrieg-style offensive. For a Russian military that prides itself on its strength, this was a major failure. The Ukrainian offensive also presented a major dilemma for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Throughout his reign, Putin has cultivated an image of being Russia's protector, the man who would keep the country safe from foreign threats. But now, with Ukrainian troops on Russian soil, that narrative has been shattered. Russians are beginning to feel the direct impact of the war in ways they haven't before. Around 150,000 Russian civilians were evacuated from the Kursk region, and the images of these evacuees broadcast on Russian TV have made it harder for ordinary Russians to pretend that the war is happening far away. Putin can use these images to stoke anger and portray Ukraine as a villain, but it also raises uncomfortable questions about why Russia's special military operation failed to prevent such an incursion. This is a difficult moment for Putin. If he acknowledges the Ukrainian gains, he risks looking weak. But if he ignores them, he risks further eroding his authority. Either way, it's clear that the war is no longer a distant conflict for the average Russian. It's now at their doorstep. For Ukraine, the Kursk incursion is not just about seizing territory. It's about demonstrating that Kyiv is still capable of bold, decisive action even as Russia advances in other parts of the country. The capture of a piece of Russian territory, however small, gives Ukraine a valuable bargaining chip in any future negotiations. Kyiv can now argue that it's not only defending its own territory, but also putting pressure on Russia itself. But there's a risk for Ukraine as well. By opening a second front in Kursk, Ukraine is stretching its forces thin. The troops and equipment used in this offensive could have been deployed in Donetsk, where the Russians are advancing steadily. If Ukraine overextends itself, it could find itself vulnerable to a Russian counterattack. Ukraine's leadership understands the stakes. President Volodymyr Zelensky knows that he needs to show his Western backers that Ukraine can still win battles and take the fight to Russia. If Ukraine's momentum stalls, there's a real danger that Western support could wane. Already, some in the West are questioning whether it's worth continuing to supply Ukraine with money and military equipment if the war seems unwinnable. So where does this leave Russia? The truth is, Moscow is in a tough spot. Its military is stretched thin, its weapons stockpiles are dwindling, and its economy is struggling under the weight of sanctions and conscription. At this point, a full retreat from Ukraine seems unlikely. Putin has too much at stake politically to pull out entirely, but a shift in strategy is almost inevitable. Russia's military may be forced to adopt a more defensive posture, focusing on holding the territory it has already seized rather than pushing deeper into Ukraine. This would mark a significant change in the dynamics of the war. It could also open the door to potential peace talks, though those remain a distant prospect for now. At home, the Kremlin faces mounting pressure to address the labor shortage, replenish its defense industry, and maintain public support for the war. It's a delicate balancing act, and there are no easy solutions. In the end, Russia's war in Ukraine is at a crossroads. The shortages of weapons and workers are real, and they're starting to take a toll on Moscow's ability to wage war effectively. While it's too early to say whether Russia will retreat, what's clear is that its ability to continue the conflict at its current pace is increasingly in doubt. Ukraine, meanwhile, has shown that it can still take the initiative, but the war remains a long, grinding struggle with no clear end in sight. What do you think? Will Russia be forced to scale back its operations? Could Ukraine's bold move in Kursk turn the tide of the war? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to stay updated on the latest developments, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, thanks for watching.